how do you fill all these holes? If you have bats using underground spaces in the mine, how do you close them so that there isn't unsafe access for humans, but bats can still use this? What do you do about tailings? You've got all this sand that's high mineral content.
How important is community engagement in that process?
Critical, I would say, critical.
Welcome to $1 Billion Projects, the only podcast sharing lessons from thought leaders who work in mining, oil and gas, and all other industrial verticals, where the projects have budgets in the millions and sometimes billions of dollars. I'm Wes Sessenwein, founder and CEO of Pay Shepherd, and I'll be your host as we explore insights and challenges from the projects that we consider to be the backbone of our economy. Now let's get started.
Brennan, welcome. Can you provide a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Brennan Lytle. I'm a project manager currently contracting to Teck Resources. I've spent, I think 18 years is the span of my career. Started off in oil and gas and got into mining by going back to Suncor and working on projects at Fort Hills, which is an oil sands mine. So it's bridging between oil and gas and mining, I guess. And then from there started working for Teck or doing work for Teck about 15, 16 months ago. So I'm a fairly new to the mining industry, shall we say, overall. But there's a number of similarities between oil and gas and mining. And at the end of the day, projects are projects. And managing projects is pretty similar across industries, it seems.
Got it. Yeah, agreed. So take me way back. Where did your career in project management start? And how did it start? How did you land in, it sounds like oil and gas.
Yeah, absolutely. So after taking a political science degree at university, came out and was wondering what I would do for a living. And a family friend was a recruiter at Suncor and got me a job as a document control clerk working in a sustainable projects or sustainability projects, essentially maintenance projects at the Firebag SAGD facility. So that's where I started in oil and gas. That's where I started in projects. So I was managing the holding, I guess, the repository of drawings, really engineering drawings. The way I thought of it is I was the librarian for the engineering drawings. And I really liked projects. I mean, that was my first exposure to projects. I was fascinated with what the project managers did. I was interested in the schedules. I was interested in what the project controls folks were doing in terms of cost control, et cetera. So I was there for about 2.5 years, and then my boss there left, and 2 or 3 months after she left, she offered me more or less the same position. It was a document control lead position at the company that she had gone to, and I left and went there essentially because it was a promotion and more money. But it turned out to be a good move because that company did a really good job of promoting folks that they thought looked promising. And after a couple of jobs there, I ended up working in project controls, and I had a great mentor there, a guy by the name of Kevin Baker. So he was the project controls manager, taught me about planning, taught me about scheduling, taught me cost control, progress measurement, all the various parts of project controls, and spent a lot of time and effort building that skill set in me, answered all my questions, always had time for me. I remember countless hours just sitting at his desk with him beside me doing the work, him telling me, do this, don't do that, remember that, etc. So I really had a fantastic mentor and teacher in him. And then he left, and I found myself as now, maybe not with the title of the project controls manager, but the only person there doing project controls. It was a fabrication company. So these projects were building treaters and free water knockouts and that sort of thing. The occasional modular packages, mostly for SAGD facilities. And then from there, jumped over to Husky Energy and worked in project controls there for it's probably about 7 years, and then got into strategic planning, and that would have been the first thing that was really close to project management, I guess, where it was building plans for and sort of facilitating the execution of these plans for developing the acreage on the gas plays that Husky had mostly in the Montney and in northern Alberta. So that was really the path to get into project management via project controls.
Super cool. Mentorship is something I'm super passionate about. I've benefited from receiving it many times throughout my career, and then offering it to others. And do you still talk to Kevin Baker?
I haven't for a few years. He was originally from Victoria, and he went back out to Victoria. It's probably, man, time flies. I wanted to say 5 years, and now that I think of it, it's probably more like 7 or 8 years. And probably a year or two after he moved back out there, the contact dwindled. So that's something I regret, I guess, having to say. Maybe I'm a little bit ashamed that I let that drop after all the time and energy he spent building into me. But yeah, I have to confess that I haven't exchanged words with him for quite a few years now.
Cool. Thank you. So then that brought you to the beginning of your project management career. And then?
Yeah. So then it took kind of a funny turn, because there was a major layoff at Husky at the end of 2019. And I kept my employment status, let's say, at Husky, but was kind of left hanging a little bit. And somebody that I had worked with in that, we called it well delivery. So in that well delivery space, had moved over to emergency management and was the manager of the emergency management department. And she said, well, I've got a job that you can take here, so that you actually have a position and you're not just kind of floating and hanging. And so I went and I worked for her in emergency management. And so that was, a totally different kind of work, but again, similar. So my role was building training, building in-person training and web-based training modules for emergency management. So the primary training was for each position within the ICS sphere. So within ICS, there are roles. You've got your incident commander, your planning section chief, operations section chief, etc. Each one of them has specific duties. So it was building training to teach folks that were pulling out of operations typically and putting in these positions so that they would be ready and trained in case of explosion, fire, major pipeline leaks, whatever kind of disasters are going to happen in hydrocarbon environment. So really building those trainings were like miniature projects. I certainly applied the principles that I'd learned up to that point in my career to build these training modules. So got through a year and did that. And then Husky was bought by Cenovus. And so spent another year not quite doing the same thing, but using what I'd done the first year for Husky and kind of putting the Cenovus brand on it and working with, they had an in-house team that built online training. And so all of the in-person training got turned into that online training. So worked through that again. And then at the end of that, got laid off from Cenovus, which was, in my view, they made the right call, that all those trainings had been completed by the time that I left. And really, I wouldn't have had any scope of work anymore. Likely would have got bored, would have been casting around for things to do. So somebody there recognized that that position was no longer really going to be needed. And so, cut the position, and it happened to be my position. So really, I think that it was exactly the right thing for them to do. And they also gave me 4 months notice before the layoff actually happened, which was nice, because most people seems to me, get about 4 minutes notice before they're out of the building. And I was given 4 months. So then reached out to a whole bunch of people that I know and said, hey, I'm looking for a job. And someone that I'd worked with before in project controls at Husky. In fact, the person that backfilled me when I went to well delivery, he was a project controls lead at Suncor. And he said, well, I can, if you want to go back to project controls, you can come and work for me here at Suncor. And I said, well, I need a job. So yeah, I'm going to say yes. So that's how I ended up at Suncor, working on Fort Hills projects again. In fact, it was planning and scheduling. So I never really got into project controls too much there, and really loved that. It was a great team. Really enjoyed the projects. A fair bit of learning because it was mining, which was new to me. I had spent most of my career either working on SAGD projects, be it the plant projects themselves, the maintenance projects, or building pressure vessels and equipment for SAGD, and then a lot of time spent in conventional oil and gas, right? Gas plants and NGL plants like we worked on together, and oil batteries, all that kind of stuff. So the mining aspect of oil and gas was totally new to me. So a lot of good learnings. And then the same person who had given me the job in emergency management knew somebody who was working from Teck, another person that I had worked with in the well delivery space. He was the lands manager, was working at Teck. Yeah, the other person who was the emergency management, who gave me the emergency management job, said, so and so is working at Teck. They really love it. They're hiring a project management position. I think you'd be a really great fit. You should think about applying. And I looked at the position. I thought, yeah, that looks really interesting. It's back to project management. Great opportunity. I might as well. I think it's maybe a little bit over my head, but I might as well try. So I put in an application, got an interview, and lo and behold, they decided to give me a job. So here I am now working for Teck, working on mine closure projects. So again, it's something totally new and different. Tons of learnings, but very, very interesting.
Okay, there's so many questions I could ask. Why over your head though? What makes you say that?
A large part of it is the difference in scope. So in mine closure, there's a lot of regulatory. There's a large regulatory component. There's a lot of interaction with government. There's a lot of scrutiny from government, and regulatory is something that I had not worked with a lot. Most of the projects I've been working on are kind of way downstream of regulatory. So I didn't have a lot of experience there outside of, open pit, putting sand in the back of a haul truck and dumping it somewhere, kind of mining projects. No experience in mining. And the vast majority of the sites that we're working on are old underground mines. So you're dealing with underground stuff, tailings, all things that were somewhat new to me. So those would have been the two main factors, I think. Another part of what I thought maybe is over my head was the way the group is structured. So this particular group is headquartered in Kimberley, BC. I don't live in Kimberley, BC. So just the dynamic around having your boss and many of your coworkers in a different place than you are, and then traveling to sites, the setup was a bit different. And that's maybe not, that didn't make it over my head, but it made it a little bit daunting. Maybe that's strange, but I just remember thinking it's something new to try and figure out and navigate in terms of motivating people, right? As a project manager, typically the people that you're trying to get work for you don't report to you. So you have to be a persuader to manage people rather than telling people what to do. And doing that in a context where you can't sit down once a week in the same room with people is different and certainly has some challenges.
so we're building a fully distributed business. We've got team members from coast to coast in Canada and the US. And it's one of the most challenging parts about building the organization is how to maintain like super high levels of engagement, even though you don't see each other. So it's not a solved problem for anybody yet, and I can definitely that resonates with me. You brought up something super interesting there, where you have to influence and motivate and drive people to do certain things that benefit the project as a whole. So again, my question is, when you think about what excellent looks like from a project manager, what is like one or two of the top attributes that an excellent project manager has in the industrial setting?
I think the number one is somebody that people want to do work for. Yeah, whether it's you're a motivator or make people feel good or whatever it happens to be, just the ability to make people want to work for you. So it's, they're not doing work because they're scared that their email inbox is always going to be full, or the telephone's always going to be ringing, you're always going to be breathing down their neck, et cetera, et cetera. But they're doing work for you because they want to do that work for you. And I think that the other piece, and maybe I'll cheat and kind of roll two things together, but organization and vision, right? So being able to see down the road and having that vision of this is what the project needs to accomplish and this is what it needs to look like, and then being able to organize that so that you can get to that vision. And that's kind of two things, but I think they go hand in glove.
So how do you do that, Brennan? How do you motivate people? What's a technique that you have?
The most effective thing is finding out what motivates people, right? So everybody has different motivators. Some people are motivated by being made to look good. Some people are motivated by, feeling like they're part of the team, like they're valued, etc. So it's finding those things for each person and then trying to highlight them or bring them out or focus on those things, right? So somebody who's motivated by being part of the team and feeling like they're part of something larger and pulling together, you keep them aware of absolutely everything. Copy them on all the emails. Make sure that they're invited to all the meetings. Ensure that they're always part of the team, called out when you're talking about people in the team, et cetera, always made to feel like they're really part of that team. For the person who is motivated by, I'll call it fame for lack of a better word, in a short period of time, you specifically highlight the good things that they're doing all the time, right? And say, okay, thanks to so-and-so, they did this, and call them out specifically and put them on that pedestal, as often as you can whenever they're doing the things that you want them to do, right? So then they can bask in the limelight, and they want to get back in that limelight. They want you to be, calling them out again. And so they're going to be looking for opportunities, I guess, for that to happen again in the future. And that leads them to want to do the work that you want to do. So those are, just a couple of examples of that, finding the person's motivation and then trying to pinpoint that all the time. And I don't think that it's a manipulative thing, because really you're building that person up. You're finding it's like your work love language, as it were, right? And then using that to forward your work, but also to boost them, to make them feel appreciated and like they are also contributing and doing something worthwhile.
So give me a real world vision of, because you think about maybe I don't know much about reclamation. I'm interested in learning, but in like a new build construction project, the vision is not the vision, the drawings that you have, the IFC package that's in front of you. How do you paint that vision if it's not?
You mentioned the drawings, the IFC package, but where do you get the IFC package in a project, right? You're in phase or stage 3. At the end of it, you're ready to go for sanction or many projects is after sanction before you have the IFC drawings, right? So that's towards the tail end. You've got your IFC drawings right before you start construction, whereas you need to have that vision right at the start. And the way that I've seen it best done in a team setting, anyways, right? If you want to get right down to brass tacks, is early on in the project, you have a framing session. So you sit down and you say, okay, well, what's the challenge or what's the problem that we have here? So if I go back to the NGL plant that we worked on, it was, well, we've been blowing down this reservoir for this many years, and we've got a whole bunch of NGLs that we've been pumping downhole to force oil out, and those NGLs are worth something, so we need to get them to surface. Okay, so that's your challenge, your issue. Okay, everybody agrees on that. Then what does the end look like? What does success look like, right? You don't worry about the middle. Here's your challenge. What is this going to look like success wise at the end of however many years? We'll figure that out later. Well, it's having all of those NGLs out and marketed, or it's having 80% of those out and marketed, or whatever that happens to be, right? But you say, okay, this is what we want to achieve. And so that's your vision. And I think it's going into your framing session, it's important that the project manager has some idea of what success would look like on that, right? And so, yeah, you have to be able to dream big kind of things. I think you want to start big, but then you also have to be prepared to have that big dream whittled down once you get in your team environment. And it's like, okay, yes, but, et cetera. And then, yeah, be able to kind of walk the line between, well, we want the world, or we want everything, but this is what sort of is actually achievable. But if you start at narrowing yourself down right off the hop, I think you could miss things, right? So I think you want to start with the perfect vision, so that you've got all those different things that you could possibly have, and then you whittle it down from there. So I guess not limiting yourself in your visioning is a key component there.
That's awesome. So now turn that upside down, and I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you effectively motivate a stellar project manager? Like, how would your leader motivate you?
A lot of it depends on the person, again, right? Like I said, in terms of the project manager motivating their team members, different people have different things that make them tick. So I would say my boss would need to determine those things, or if I was the director and I had project managers working under me, it would be, okay, find out what motivates that person, right? Is it fame? Is it being on the pedestal? Is it money? Is it interesting projects? Is it, constantly learning and trying out different things? And then, to the best of your ability, facilitate that or provide the opportunity for those things, so that they're always keen to come to work and they're always hungry to work on their projects.
I don't know much about reclamation. My career's been in new builds and retrofits and expansions, and not in reclamation. What has that shift been like, and what's different with that world?
One thing that I've noticed is, and I'll back up a bit and say that the projects that I'm working on are entirely in the province of BC. So not only is it different in terms of their mines instead of wells or gas plants, that sort of thing, or pipelines, but you also have a different government, a different regulator. And one thing that I've noticed coming from oil and gas in Alberta to mining in BC is that, and maybe appreciated for the Alberta side, is with the AER, everything is very cut and dried. Everything is really cleared. If you're wanting to abandon a well site, it's you do this, and this, and then you'll get your reclamation certificate, and off you go. The liability is no longer with the company. On the mining side in BC, that doesn't exist. So, to my knowledge, no mine has ever been fully reclaimed and handed over to the provincial government. Mines are closed, they're cleaned up and they're closed, but the lands are still held by that mining company into perpetuity. They're maintaining that, they're testing water, doing this and that and the other thing. So what we're working towards is trying to get to a point where, and we call it relinquishable, because we aren't going to say, we can't say that it's guaranteed that we'll be able to relinquish any of these mines, but that's the big vision again, right? Like that's the perfect, the best case is that we bring these mine sites to a position where they could be handed back over to the community, really. Our expectation or our hope would be that the provincial government would take over responsibility ultimately, but then those lands would be safe and would be open and accessible to the community. That's different from also the career that I was working in, because it was mostly, again, construction, right? Like putting in pipelines or building gas plants, et cetera. And it was, okay, here's a bare piece of ground, and what are we going to do with this? We're going to build something. And now it's, okay, let's take all this stuff that was built and these holes that were dug, et cetera, and let's close it all up and make sure that it's safe and that we're confident that we can walk away and the water coming out is going to be clean and nothing's going to open up and, and swallow someone who's walking their dog. And we can totally walk away, hands off, full confidence that everything is safe and that it's in a good place environmentally, and that's not going to change 10, 20, 30, 100 years down the road. So that's the big vision. So there's a piece of working with the provincial government, with the regulator, to get them on board with that vision as well. There's a piece of working with the communities to determine, well, what kind of land use do they want here? What do they want ultimately to be able to do with those lands? And then, of course, there's all the technical pieces in terms of how do you maintain water quality without continually monitoring water or treating water, et cetera, et cetera. How do you fill all these holes? If you have bats using underground spaces in the mine, how do you close them so that there isn't unsafe access for humans, but bats can still use this? What do you do about tailings? You've got all this sand that's high mineral content. How do you deal with that so that the land that they're on or underneath is still usable, but it's not going to have an impact to water courses, et cetera? And then it's walking through all those pieces, figuring all those things out, packaging it all up and saying, okay, these are the works that we're going to do. This is what we'll get to in the end. And if we do our work well, we persuade the regulator to say, yep, we're happy with this. The community is happy with this. Now you can walk away and your company is no longer liable.
How important is community engagement in that process?
Critical, I would say critical, because
is that a part of your role? Do you have team members that help you with it? How do you do that?
Yeah, there's a community engagement person on really for each site for any project that's going on, and there's constant liaising with the community. And then even it goes into other aspects like contracting, right? We're always trying to bring in members of the community or companies within the community to do works on the site so that they're involved. And so it really flows through the entirety of the project. Yeah, I really probably can't stress enough how critical and important that community aspect is. And I would say, again, more so than I saw in building new works in the oil and gas space. There was obviously there is a community aspect. There's consultation, and when you're dealing with private lands, you have to you have to get the private landholder to be involved. But I didn't see it as intertwined with almost every aspect of the project like it is with these ones.
So in new construction, you have very common types of contractors that you're dealing with, mechanical, civil, electrical, tons. But how does that differ from what you see in reclamation? Is it the same set of contractors? Is it specialty contractors? How does that differ? And then also, can you source those things locally?
So a lot of specialty consultants, a lot of geotech engineers, geochemistry, water experts of numerous stripes, right? Be they hydrogeological or hydrologic engineers or environmental engineers. Then you've got, a lot of kind of specialty, I guess, water sampling folks. And when it comes to the works, to the construction, it's mostly just like earthworks contractors. So not a lot of mechanical or electrical like you see in the new builds. No process, obviously, because you're not putting together. You're taking apart, and in many of these projects, the buildings have already been removed, right? Like I say, there was closure done to a point, and oftentimes that was done in the 90s or the early 2000s. So all of the buildings and that sort of thing have been removed. So you're really just working with rock and sand at this point, rock, sand, and water. So it's there are different disciplines, and most of them are in the consultant space while you're putting together the plan and the design, and then the execution is for the most part like earthworks kind of thing. And then, I mean, where you do have buildings, there you've got abatement folks and demolition folks and that sort of thing.
How do you come up that learning curve? I know anytime that you end up managing a new specialty contractor, a new scope, in order to be most effective, you should probably know the fundamentals. How do you come up the curve on that scope?
You ask a lot of questions, and then, like we touched on, mentors in the past, always looking around for someone to mentor me. If it's not in the entirety of my work, it's this piece or that piece. You find someone that seems to know everything about demolition, and spend as much time talking to them as you can, asking all the questions. When you come up against something, get their opinion, that sort of thing. You find the person that's an expert on geotechnical, and you ask all the rock questions and the underground questions and that sort of thing. So it's finding kind of short-term mentors or mini mentors or whatever you want to call it, and or experts, if you will, and asking tons of questions and picking their brain and making sure that you're gaining an understanding of these things that you didn't know about. And thus far, I have to say, people have been very patient and gracious with me, which I think it's been fortunate for me, or a blessing for me to have that kind of patience, because these folks are busy as well.
There has to be a natural curiosity, right?
I would say so. Yeah, I think you're sunk if you're not curious, because then you won't learn, you won't pick things up, and you'll miss things. And I think you'd struggle without that natural curiosity.
Communication in the project environment, we know how important it is. Where you've got two parties that you're working with that may have competing priorities or differing viewpoints, but it's up to you to align them. How do you go about doing that? Whatever scenario it might be, I'm sure you deal with thousands. It could be internal stakeholders, it could be external stakeholders in community, or regulators. How do you go about aligning folks to achieve that vision that you've talked about?
Sure. So first of all, making sure that you understand fully what their positions are, so that you're not going to mischaracterize anything, and ensuring that both of them understand their positions. Because a lot of time you get conflict because the person doesn't really understand the position of the other party, and what they're reacting to or against is a misunderstanding, is what they think that person wants, and that is sometimes not actually what that person is saying they want. They're actually closer than than they think. This example is more like between it wasn't two opposing parties. There were two parties that were working together, like prime contractor and subcontractor, and then us on the project team. They had come together and bid something to us with day rates, and we wanted hourly rates. At first blush, it was just like, no, we have to have hourly rates. But then when we unpacked it, and it was like, okay, well, why do you want day rates, and why do we want hourly rates? We're saying we want hourly rates because, well, so first I'll say they wanted day rates because they're going, okay, if we're sending people to stay in a camp, they're going there to make money. They don't want to be sitting around and not getting paid, essentially. And we're going, okay, yeah, but sometimes we won't be staying in camp. And if we're commuting people in and out with a helicopter and the weather is bad and we can only get them in for 5 or 6 hours that day, we don't want to have to pay for 10, right? And yes, we're motivated to make sure you have 10 hours a day when you're in camp and you're on site. So, okay, let's make sure that we'll say, yep, we will ensure that when on site in camp, you're working at least 10 hours a day. But if we're not working in camp, if we're, for whatever reason, camp's not set up and we're commuting with the helicopter and the days are shorter, then we aren't going to, then you're going to charge us only for the 5 hours or the 6 hours or whatever. And they're saying, oh yeah, that's totally reasonable. If the person's in town, they don't even get out of the helicopter. Yeah, we won't charge you for those 10 hours because they're not, they're not sitting in camp or whatever, right? So coming to those motivations, and that's us and somebody else, so it's not between two parties. But you can do the same thing, right? You just have to be mediating that rather than saying, well, hold on, why do you want this day rate? What is your motivation? That's just it, like understanding everything clearly, right? It's like in project management, the key thing is having the scope clearly defined, right? If you don't have your scope clearly defined, you're going to run into problems down the road, right? You're going to have change orders and rework and frustration and all the rest of it. So it's the same thing when there's a conflict or an apparent conflict. Let's get everything clarified. What is your understanding? What is your motivation? What is it that you want? What is it that the other one wants? And then the other part, I would say, in terms of mediating two parties that are, I guess, somewhat at loggerheads, is bringing it back to the vision. So saying, okay, look, we all want this, right? We all want this outcome. We've agreed on that. And so if we're all agreed that we want this, we just have to figure out the best way to get there. And what we're disagreeing on, or what you're disagreeing on, is the best way to get there. So let's maybe just take it back and go back. Okay, what do we need to do to get there? What does each side need to do? And then sometimes there likely will have to be some give and take. And I mean, an example that we've had recently maybe that helps with this is we've had a water sampling campaign where they're sampling in a river and in some creeks that are running fairly, they're swift running creeks. So the water sampling folks are saying, well, we have to get these samples to have a quality view or understanding of water quality on the site. And the safety folks are looking at some of these locations saying, oh my goodness, like this is really dangerous. If someone slips or you have a log coming down the street, takes out somebody's knee, the potential of drowning is there, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, okay, let's get together. Ultimately, what's the vision? Well, we need to get this water sampling and everybody has to go home not in a body bag. Everybody's agreed on that, right? The people that are doing the sampling don't want to get killed. They don't want to get hypothermia. They want this to go smoothly. What we did is we just looked at all the sampling locations and said, okay, if you're going to this place here, it's really fast, deep water there. What if you went downstream 20 feet to this spot here where it's a little bit, more gravelly and it's not as deep? Can you do the same sample there? Well, yeah, that'll do. Okay. Right. And it's more work. You have to go through all the sites, but you can get to the same place where both are happy. Maybe both aren't totally happy. It's not the perfect sampling location, or this area still has a bit of risk, and we're going to cover that with PPE and with using throw bags and swift water rescue techniques, etc. But you can put it together, right? So I think once everybody's in agreement, it's like you're sitting on the same side of the table looking at the problem and saying, okay, item by item, how are we going to do this so that we're both satisfied?
Unpacking, repacking. That's great examples. Like you nailed it. That's super clear what you were talking about. Two more questions for you. How does data come into play when you think about the execution of your projects, whether it's a new construction or reclamation? How does data come into play?
In the beginning, it's in your design, right? You need data to decide. So let's say you're building a new project, you're building a gas plant. Well, you need a whole bunch of data to be able to come up with the right process, right? And then I guess down the road a little bit, you need all kinds of data, say in your P&IDs, right? You need to know, well, how many valves do I have? How many pumps do I have? What are they, et cetera, so that you can be ordering the right things. What sked pipe do I have? How many meters? How many elbows, et cetera, so that you can do all your ordering. So having the right data at the right time about the right things is important through the beginning to design it properly, and then to kind of start your execution properly. And then in construction, data is, I would say, critical in terms of what's being done so that you can know what your productivity is. And there you're kind of piggybacking off of the data that you had collected in your design, because the design data is saying these are all the bits and pieces that have to go in this order. And then as it's getting executed, you're getting, okay, we put in these bits and pieces in this order today. And you start sort of putting the data together in the puzzle and seeing how much did we actually do. And then couple that in or tie that in with your cost data so that you can tell, okay, is what we did worth the money we spent? And if it is great, everybody's happy. And if it's not, then it's okay. We're going to sit down and take a hard look at this and maybe have some hard conversations and have to adjust a little bit. And that's probably, I'm very biased towards the project controls aspect. You can probably tell from having spent a lot of time in project controls, there's an awful lot of data, and it's all that kind of data, production data and cost data. In the reclamation side, there's a lot in the front end in terms of getting your design. So like I was alluding to water quality, there's an unbelievable amount of data collected around water quality, both so you have a baseline so that when you're done, you can say, yes, we've made things better, but also so that you can start modeling and coming up with the plan of, well, what are we actually going to have to do to make things better? You need data for the rock quality underground so that you can tell if it's stable, or do we have to do works to make sure everything is stable. You get data on your tailings, how much mineralization is in them, or what's the mineral content in them, how potentially harmful are they, and that will dictate what you do with things ultimately. So yeah, data is important, and collecting it and holding it, I guess, and organizing it properly is also important, because you can have all the data in the world, and if you haven't organized it, you won't be able to do anything with it. And if you get all the wrong data, then you're just wasting your time and spinning your tires. So that was probably actually what you're trying to get at, and I went at it by a very circuitous route.
I like it. You've got it from multiple angles. So that's awesome. Brennan, my last question for you is: there's a new grad in university somewhere, maybe a poli-sci student who's thinking about future careers, and maybe they're thinking about the resource sector and project management. What would you share about this career with them to help them decide, hey, that's for me, or that's not for me?
I guess probably some of the things we've talked about, right? Are you curious? Are you good? Do you like to ask questions, or do you ask questions? Do you work well with a team? Do you care about people enough to get to know them so that you can tell what their motivations are and try and focus on those motivations so that you can get them to do work for you? Yeah, those would be the biggest questions, really. It's like, do you like to organize things? Do you like people? Do you like working with a team? Are you curious, and do you like to ask questions? I think those would be the biggest. Those would be my top 5 questions for a person. And if they answer no to all of them, I would say, yeah, project management is probably not for you.
Yeah, it's a litmus test. So this like one insight that I have, having come from industrial construction and building, and understanding what a successful project manager looks like, actually maps almost 1-to-1 with what a successful software implementation manager looks like. Same skill set. Need to align people, drive priorities, move things forward, measure, deal with challenges as they come up, deal with people. It's all the same skill set. So, Brennan, when you're done in your reclamation career, if you want to come over and join us and implement software, I'd love to have you on the team.
Sounds good. Yeah, appreciate that. I was going to say, so it makes sense you've landed where you have. The skill set matches perfectly.
Sounds good, Brennan. I appreciate the time today. Thanks for carving it out of your schedule, and it was great to connect and learn more about your career and some of your insights.
Likewise, my pleasure. Thank you, Wes.